rifles? No, I don't want. You get a few rifles and knock your foot out.
Oh, yeah.
Then we do really.
Oh, yeah. Can't hear anything.
Did you guys enjoy the first lab with Tom?
No.
No?
He said he can have a lecture, so I was on Zoom. And so I didn't even get to see it.
It's not anything made up.
Yeah, no, because he brought some pretty cool sources down. Yeah, Sam?
So now it's gonna sound like you can't make up labs or something like that, or it's gonna be hard to make them up.
So I think what he is wanting is he really wants people present. So if you're just missing lab, you're gonna miss it. If you communicate ahead of time with him, like the same COVID stuff, if you're sick and like you can't attend and stuff, he's gonna work with you, but he just doesn't want people to miss lab if at all possible.
Well, I talked to him on Monday after class and told him I was gonna be on Zoom, and he said that's fine. And then when I got on Zoom today, he didn't show up, so I felt kind of.
Yeah, I think the Monday lectures, it's fine to be on Zoom, but Wednesday is gonna be labs. And he's got a lot of sources and equipment he's gonna bring from his company in Idaho Falls. You guys are gonna get to see some really cool stuff.
Do you think he'd let us make that up? Just this one time?
I would talk to him and say, hey, like I misunderstood. Is there anything I can do as an alternative?
Well, Christy got on, and she said, this is, you can't make this up.
Okay. Well, I'd double check with Tom because I don't know if she asked Tom and then told you that for him, or if she was just thinking because he can't bring those sources again, that you wouldn't have the ability to. I'd send him an email. Yeah, Sam?
You know, with my investigation, before I go home, I have to stay away from people kind of stuff. Isolated stuff, it's not really clear to me to go home.
Okay.
So is that something I have to get like a medical exemption for? Or?
I would just tell him that.
Okay.
I would just tell him that and say, hey, I already know this, so you can be planning for at the end of the semester before I go home or whenever you're gonna visit. And I can give you the dates and I can come early or whatever. I think if you communicate with him, he'll work with you guys.
So, I don't like Tom's quizzing grading system.
I don't either.
You do it differently?
The
He's doing
averages
it.
scores.
He's doing what you did for the reactor class,
The averages.
yeah, averages.
Well, the best advice you give your those students, you need to do that.
I mean, that was how Sam and Marcus approached the 298 class, because they just wanted to take it once.
I don't ever want to take anything more.
What is it?
Dude.
So, Kyle,
Yes.
if you want to switch to doing the SL1 accent, there's only 3 people doing that one. So you can switch.
That's the problem I'm afraid of. I'm not a fast reader. But it'll probably take me 2 years.
You can do an audiobook.
Yeah, you
I mean, I like audiobooks. The problem is I don't pay attention if I do that.
Well, I do both. I have both books so that I can get through the book.
have you started reading the Chernobyl
I
book?
don't have my book.
Okay.
I'm supposed to next time.
Oh, God, if you look at it, you're gonna want to.
So I think they're super interesting and enjoyable. You don't have to start quite yet. We've got, I think, almost a month before we start wanting to have those read and having discussion. So if you're a super slow reader, like maybe yes, you do want to start. But I think you'll enjoy any of the books. That Chernobyl book is also very narrative. There's a mix of history technical details and then a timeline of progression of the accident that all go into the chapters. And like, I read that one on the flight to Ukraine. So it just, I thought it was fascinating. I did. It was like,
Chernobyl book.
I did. But it was like, you're sitting there on the plane
Oh my god.
and I couldn't sleep.
Yeah, I'm like.
I read like 4
chapter
pages.
two.
You're into chapter 2? Yeah,
13
it's
hours.
super interesting.
Yeah.
But do you want to switch to doing the SL1 accident?
I'm gonna try the Chernobyl then.
Okay.
See.
It's not hard to get into.
If not,
It's not.
I'm gonna wing it. We all know it's gonna happen. So, I'm gonna give it my-
Except that I have to assign you to a
the
topic.
old college try.
Okay, so just a quick check. How many of you noticed that before class today you were supposed to read in this book?
No, just barely noticed right now.
No, you're not reading it.
I feel that way.
Okay,
I thought I was already human performance safe.
Just kidding.
Or I read the DOE.
okay, all right. So I kind of assumed that people would miss that, it being the first week of classes and stuff. So it's all right, we'll still have some of our discussion.
Do you want to remind about attendance?
Yes,
Oh,
you guys want to go ahead and do attendance? Does anyone need me to do it for them?
Yeah, will you do mine, me? My phone
Thanks for that.
takes like 5 minutes to even get on.
That's what I was saying. Takes forever.
Okay, so Caden.
Yep.
Kyle.
Yep.
Lynette. You did yours, Lynette. Marcus, would you like, yep, okay. Sam, did you want me to? Okay.
Yep.
And Haley,
I just did it.
you just did it, okay.
Okay, I made my decision. I want to change the SL1. I'm scared. I'm terrified of books, honestly. I'm not even kidding.
The SL1 book is very interesting because the author is slightly anti-nuclear. It's a really interesting perspective to hear him talk about the accident. And then there are lingering allegations, which I have no idea if they're true, that there was a love triangle.
I was gonna ask if you talked about the rumors.
It does, and it talks about the horrible state of their marriages and the affairs they were having. And so it's like all this drama.
You might have to get into.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
And then all that drama is in the background of like explaining kind of the nuclear evolution of the reactor test site here at Idaho. It's interesting. They're all interesting books. I read them all and I liked them all. But okay, I will change you over, Kyle.
Thank you. I gotta order that now.
So we should focus like really heavily on the love triangle part of that, right?
Yes, that's definitely the most informative.
Okay. And the buried ambulance.
Yes.
Is that it?
So Jay Coons, who is an honorary dean of the nuclear engineering department here on campus, he was one of my professors when I was going to grad school here. He was one of the nuke techs that had to survey the ambulance that they took the operators to the hospital in. And that ambulance, because they had no idea how to prevent contamination and they were focused on the life-saving, right? Which was actually not possible at that point based on his dose, but they didn't know that. And that ambulance from the SL1 accident is so contaminated that the site bought it from the hospital and buried it in the desert. And he was there, he saw it, which is kind of cool to hear him talk about it.
Well, like over the summer, or over our winter break, it was the anniversary of that happening, so I read the link that I sent out about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, they're all fascinating. Okay. So, in the Mizumi text, those of you online, Jack and Porter, did you guys catch the little instruction in Moodle to read the yellow and black book before class today?
No, and I have to re-rent that stupid book, so I'll get that today.
It's not
Okay.
stupid.
Let's read it
So I'm gonna point out a couple of interesting and important highlights from those chapters. I would definitely suggest that you have the reading before Friday, because the exercise we're gonna do, I'm gonna count on you guys to have read the DOE handbook and to be familiar with the terminology and the concepts from that reading and from the slides when you put together your answer for that exercise we're gonna do. So these two chapters, this part 4 of this book is learning from experience. And the first chapter is an outline of how in Japan they approach human factors studies by the electrical power industry. And actually, you know, they present it as this awesome thing that Japan does, but it's really very similar to what the United States does. It's all concepts from IMPO, which is the International Nuclear Power something, but they're a group that tells power companies, nuclear power companies, how to kind of approach safety. And so if you look on page 277 of the book, the underlying contention of this chapter is that continuous attempts to reduce incidents in nuclear power plants is one of the most effective ways to improve public acceptance of nuclear power. To ensure the safety and reliability of nuclear power plants, a great deal was done between the 70s and 80s to modify and standardize the designs, materials, equipments, components of these installations. And the significant improvements in that hardware reduced the rate of incidents to approximately 1/4 of their initial level. So when we were first starting to have nuclear power, we were building the plants and we were experimenting with the technology, things were not standardized. Nobody really knew the best practices. And as we had accidents and learned, we did a lot of changes to the designs and the way we installed these systems and facilities. That reduced our accidents 75%. It was a huge step, right? In just saying, this is how we need to do nuclear technology. We need to use nuclear grade materials. We need to make sure that we've rated things to the appropriate pressures and temperatures. This is how we build a nuclear power plant. However, about 20% of all of the accidents in Japan that were reported to regulatory bodies are attributed to human error. So even though we fixed a lot of the physical components of our facilities, we're still having a major contributor from human error, which we talked about on Monday, that the biggest root cause in most US accidents is human error, right? It's not necessarily our physical systems anymore, it's what people do. The US NRC released a report. This is a very famous report called the Rasmussen Report. This was put forth in 1975, and the US Regulatory Committee was essentially telling all the power plants, hey, you guys are not addressing the fact that there's all these root causes that are how people are interacting with your system. Then in 87, so a little bit less than 10 years later, or sorry, a little bit more than 10 years later, there was 3 Mile Island. And one of the reasons that people in the industry think that we really were able to correct a lot of the errors that led to 3 Mile Island is that the Rasmussen report and some of the effects that it caused had gotten the industry thinking about operator error, because the system at 3 Mile Island, it could have resisted that accident. And honestly, a lot of the safety systems that were designed around the plant did their job very, very well. That's why 3 Mile Island did not release radioactive material in nearly the same way that Chernobyl did, because we had built a lot of good systems around it. We had a lot of good designs. The problem was that operator error, really. Chernobyl had operator error too, but that was combined with some design issues as well. Were you gonna ask a question, Joe?
3 Mile Island was 79,
79, I'm sorry, what did I say?
87.
Okay.
But I didn't know, maybe you're talking about Chernobyl.
79? Oh yeah, it was, because Chernobyl was 80 something.
86.
Yeah. So I'm sorry. I confused those. 79, 86. Okay. An interesting statement that they pulled out just before that 18.1 section, and you guys are going to see this over and over in all the accidents we analyze. Most of the major accidents have occurred between midnight and 4 a.m. And I think this is an issue with translation because they say it's when the operator's arousal level is at its lowest. I think they mean attentiveness.
I hope it's at its lowest.
But you'll see as we study, a lot of the accidents that we're going to look at, they happen during night shifts or during unexpected and abnormal evolutions, where not only are you tempted to not be alert because it's nighttime, or you have so many things trying to pull your focus, it's very easy to miss what's actually important in all of what's happening. And we're going to see that, I think, pretty much universally in the majority of the accidents we're going to study. Okay. This says on the next page, underneath the table, that in other countries, human factors have been classified into roughly 5 areas. What that means is that the United States has pretty much decided to classify these things this way, as well as the NRC, and they're taking that standard. So, human reliability assessment. This is an attempt to qualify how often we think you as an operator are going to make a mistake and compare that to how significant that mistake is. Because if it's a very minor mistake, we can tolerate you making it a lot, right? If it's a very significant mistake, we can't tolerate that happening very often. So we need more protection between the mistake and the consequence, right? And this is where we develop our probabilistic risk assessment. Yeah, Sam.
What small mistakes do you make wrong?
You could make a typo in a log entry, right? Because there's somebody who's going to second check that. There's the ability to ask you what you meant and get clarification. You could read an instrument incorrectly on a round sheet because someone's going to check that and they have the ability to ask you what you meant and if that was really a correct reading. You could make mistakes in three-way communication because as long as that person is repeating back to you, you have the opportunity to say, oh, I made a mistake, let me clarify, right? Things like that, right? Because there's pretty low consequence because you have a built-in way to catch a lot of those errors. You can't increase power when you meant to decrease. You can't turn a system off when you meant to turn it on, right? Those are much bigger consequences. And so there's going to be multiple barriers to letting you just push one button and turn something off, right? Human-machine interface. How many of you guys have heard that term, human-machine interface? Not until you read it? Okay. So when we talked about on Monday are bad controls, controls that are set up for it easy for you to use and intuitive for you to use are super important. I don't know how many of you guys remember, but last semester they talked about in this book how there was the dials where you turned them different ways to go up and down, and that different operators had different ideas of which way should happen, depending on if they were left or right-handed, and if they were on the left or right side of the control panel. So things like that. There's actually a group that I'm trying really hard to get us involved with at INL because they want to provide some internship and scholarship opportunities. They want to take brand new operators and they want to put you at their simulator at the K's building, and they want to study how you interact with the systems so they can design better state-of-the-art control panels. And I think that you guys should be the guinea pigs for this because they want to give you money to do it. But that human-machine interface is super important. And I think I've mentioned this several times. It's one of the areas where the fact that the older facilities were very much designed with a workforce that was almost entirely male. There's a big difference in what's comfortable then for women in control panels. And like, even right now, I'm sitting at a desk with a chair that arranges my feet like foot off the ground, right? Not super comfortable, because I think for this one, it's supposed to be a standing desk, but you get that in control panels too, where they're expecting average males taller than the average female. They're expecting a taller person to use that desk or that control panel. It gets hard when you have to reach or you can't see things at eye level and you have to stand on tiptoes, right? So making sure that control panels meet the needs of our workforce. Or I can't tell you how many of you have come in my office or had a question in the classroom and I go to touch your computer screen because I have touch screens and I'm just so used to that. And then Apple does this own weird scroll thing, and so I just can't use Lynette's laptop. But more and more things in our world are touchscreen, right? And so like looking at those differences of what's intuitive is a huge part of human factors. Operator support systems and operator cognitive models, and then this middle one, measurement, analysis, and assessment of human behavior. This is a lot of the multidisciplinary, emotional, psychological, and physical systems that kind of interact and talk about how you make a decision, how you interpret data. For example, when we have a safety system that has a red tag, we're just trained as humans to view that red as some sort of special warning or danger, right? Well, that can be really difficult in power plants where red might also be used to indicate the systems that are hot versus blue on systems that are cold. And then you've got systems that are blue and white that talk about liquid and gas. And then you've got systems that are marked red because there's an OSHA safety requirement to have red labels, right? And so these now all have different meanings. And how you interpret that is going to be based on what you believe is the most important. As a safety system oversight officer at the INL, whenever I saw a red tag, I immediately thought, this is a safety significant system that's been tagged. Why is it allowed to exist like this or be in this part of the building? Or why isn't this form or sheet that should be here to log it there? And I'd have to stop and look and like, is this a safety system or is this a thermally hot system? Because my training was nuclear, red is a safety system, right? And so what you're trained in and what your values are going to change how you interpret data. A lot of the rest of the chapter talks about how they've developed human factors databases to study this and give us lessons learned. And we're going to talk a little bit on Friday about behavior-based safety. Because we've been able to look at this and quantify it, we can actually formulate a way to handle how we make those decisions that are going to help us make better ones. Do you have a question, Sam?
Yeah, so later in this chapter, it talks about advanced age of operators as being something that can impact your whatever. And so in the United States, you can't judge or give someone a job based on age and different discriminatory things. So how does that play in? So we know that could be a human factor, but we can't prevent people from having that role.
Yeah, so it's actually really complex because there's pros and cons on age in any industry. Older nuclear operators have a tremendous amount of practical experience that is usually extremely valuable. And even though I think better than most industries, the nuclear industry pushes things to be proceduralized and put into handbooks so that knowledge can be transferred to incoming operators, we're not 100%. There is always valuable information lost whenever an experienced operator retires or quits. And it is not necessarily given to the newbie until they've just struggled through experience, right? So keeping senior operators or finding ways to recycle them into training positions is extremely important. However, when you're older, you tend to be less able to adjust to change, just in general. You're usually more set in how you do something because you've been trained to do that thing consistently for so long. And the older we get, the harder it is for us to learn new things, just as humans. It becomes more and more challenging to create those neural pathways for learning when it's been so long since you've had to do so much growth and development as a younger person, right? Kids' brain grows a tremendous amount in their first 2 years, And then ever since then, your brain grows less, becomes harder and harder to learn. So it can be very difficult when the nuclear industry or any industry discovers we have to make this change and we need everyone to get on board, because a lot of those senior positions are going to be management at that point. And so they have to make that change from the top down, but now they're struggling themselves to change. And I think my experience has been that people in the nuclear industry actually stay way more mentally flexible than a lot of other technical positions, because we push lessons learned and constant learning. We push training maintenance. So even though you may know something, you're going to receive training in that topic to learn new things and become better. And so we really promote that as a culture in the industry. And I think it makes a lot of our workforce just more adaptable, more in that mindset of constant learning and self-improvement, and more able to adapt. Just personally, what I've seen compared to others. So it's a complex issue, because you both want to make sure that you're bringing in new people to get side-by-side experience with the experienced people and get them trained. You don't want to lose that valuable experience, but you also want to make sure that the industry is able to keep up with the new technology and the changes that are valuable and available, despite some resistance to change by people who are established. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, I would pay attention to table 18.2. There's a list of performance shaping factors, and these are things that can allow for a better prediction of behavioral errors. And you're going to see that there's a list of both positives and negatives. And so as we do our analysis in later weeks and later activities, be thinking to this list and be looking for examples of these things that existed in the precursors to the accident that probably could have let you predict that the behavior of the operator was going to be influenced by something that they weren't necessarily noting and controlling. I would say that referencing this table in your accident analysis is a very positive way to show that you're looking at our standard human factors and accounting for them in your analysis of the accident. Then skipping over to chapter 19 on page 292. It mentioned in that first chapter that the 70s and 80s did a lot of physical improvements, and that reduced our incidence of accidents by 75%. In 1995, Japan had 47 nuclear power plants and a collection of 863 incident reports for that year. 188 of those were due to human error. And since the 90s, the rate of those human errors have been decreasing. And then if you look over here at this figure 19.2, they show an increase in the number of power plants and a pretty steady decrease in the number of incidents. So even though we're going to talk about this and it's like a huge contributor to major accidents, we've learned a lot about how to handle it, and the industry is getting better and better. And so some of the training, some of the reading that we're going to do in this class is going to be a little bit dry, but it's really been proven to work if you take it and implement it for yourself as an operator. So as you kind of read through this, I know that this book, some of you don't love the way it reads, but it is proven when you think about things from this nuclear safety culture standpoint that it really does help our facilities operate safely. This 19.2.1 section that starts on 294, and let me put that in chat because this will be important. So section 19.2.1, put that in chat for you guys. it's going to do an analysis. And this is a very simplistic hazard analysis, just looking at human factors. I would say that in your written assignments where I ask you to analyze an accident, if you follow these steps and kind of ask and answer these questions, that will almost always get you the level of detail I'm looking for in your written assignments. Okay? Why did the accident happen? Why did we reach a criticality alarm? Why did we have a meltdown? Because, in this case, there's a tripped pump during operations, okay? Why was it trumped? Personnel shorted the electrical equipment with screwdrivers. They had an inappropriate action, right? Why did the screwdrivers short them? Well, they checked the wires with the screwdrivers held in a hand and they weren't insulated. So that's the direct cause of that inappropriate action, right? The working space was limited, or staff member was not wearing a belt to hold the screwdrivers, or they didn't have insulated tools, right? And then latent causes, the workplace was not designed to be worked in, they were in a hurry, and the foreman didn't put in a good order for the right tools that were insulated, right? And then measures to deal with those causes. So if you go through a process like that, when we think about these accidents we're going to discuss, you're going to get the whys, and then you're going to be able to say, based on that, this is what I would do differently, which almost every one of my assignments asks you guys to answer that question. So that's a really helpful little section. And then there's some really good definitions starting on page 295 and going through page 297 of inappropriate actions, extraneous acts that can be causes for accidents that are just good resources. So if you didn't do that reading, hopefully that kind of shows you some areas to focus on and what I'm kind of hoping for you to get out of it. Do make sure you're checking Moodle. I'll try to remind you guys a little bit more consistently, but there are some times that I ask you guys to read ahead. Okay. Let's talk about technical errors and human failure. Let me share this with the folks online. And you can feel free to turn off the lights if you guys want.
Planes fall out of the sky, when trains collide, when oil platforms explode, or when nuclear cores suffer a meltdown, we always ask the same question. Was it technical failure or human error? Why do we ask this question? And when did we start to ask this question? And who introduced this apparent dualism of accident causality? In 1931, Herbert William Heinrich was the first one to make the claim that he had conducted a scientific analysis of accidents. Following a systematic categorization of a vast dataset, he drew the conclusion that industrial accidents can be caused by either technical failure or unsafe acts of people. And it had to be either or. Which also means that if you rule out one of these two, it must be the other one. We've found no evidence that there was a technical failure, so human it is then. And according to Heinrich, most of the time human it was. In 88% of the accidents Heinrich studied, he claimed the cause was unsafe acts of people. And still today we teach operators of high-risk systems that 75% or something similar of accidents are caused by human factors. And we spend much time and efforts on human-targeted research and programs to make the humans more reliable in order to change this ratio. So why then did this dualism become the norm? Well, it makes sense and it's easy to comprehend, right? Someone or something has to be at blame, right? And if we look at media reports today, this dualism is apparent. Something or someone made a mistake, right? That's why the accidents happen. Someone made a mistake or something malfunctioned. Just look at the 2016 train crash in Germany that killed 11 people. Just days after the accident, the German Minister of Transport was quoted to conclude that since no technical failure could be identified, the accident must have been caused by a terrible human error. Now, Heinrich could have had other motives for building this accident dualism theory, motives that touches on the power relations of the actors in the industrialized world. You see, Heinrich was working for the insurance industry, where he was analyzing industrial workers' harm claim files. And if he could show that the worker harmed himself, yeah, no gender perspective at this time, by an unsafe act, the claim could be dismissed. It's really a shame that Heinrich never left any of his data for us to reanalyze. That could have saved him from insinuating suggestions like the one I just made. But safety science and practice has not been as one-sided as I might make it sound. During the end of the Second World War, a critique of this perspective was developed and a new scientific school of thought emerged as a result. The field's pioneers, including Chapanis, Fitz and Jones, claimed that rather than labeling accidents as fundamentally technical or human, we need to understand interactions between technology and people. For example, how technology can contribute to or foster what seems like human error, and how human-machine coordination and synchronization can be improved. What they founded was a scientific field that we today call human factors. So, to go back to the question, was it technical failure or human error? Today, with the vast research that human factors community has produced for the last 60 years, the answer should probably be no. It was not technical failure or human error. The question is wrong. The system is much more complex than this dualism allows for. And in order to understand the causes of accidents, we must do our best to understand this complexity. Accidents can happen when all components and actors are working as intended, and even when they are not working as intended, accidents typically do not happen. We must understand the interactions and relations between the system actors and components to understand how accidents happen as well as how safety is guaranteed.
Okay. Will you guys turn the light back on? So, based on that discussion and what we just read about all this analysis that goes into human errors, what does that make you guys think? Kyle.
Well, I was about to well, I don't know. The first claims they made by Heinrich,
Heinrich.
I mean, I understand where he's going there, but until the end of the video, I was like, that can't be either or, you know what I mean? Things happen, and then in the situation where the train, then again, I don't understand the whole situation, but when things like the train accident happen and things are destroyed and people are killed, how do you know damage isn't done to technical, you know what I mean? If the whole train is demolished, how are they gonna pin that on a person?
Or, what I also noticed is saying you couldn't find a technical reason is not saying there wasn't one.
Right, that's silly.
There-
Anyways, and then he corrected, not corrected, but went in a different direction at the end of the video, and I was like, oh, okay, I don't know if I agree with this guy.
Yeah. Yeah. He sets up that duality and tears it apart, which I very much agree with. Obviously, that's why I showed the video. What else? What else do you guys think in terms of that discussion? Yeah, Sam.
Well, I just thought it was interesting you brought up your equipment to be malfunctioning correctly, but it still works and there's never an accident. Like sometimes your car, it might be squeaking or something and you never brakes on you. And then that's something I don't think we think about a lot is, my computer turned on, I can go online with it. Doesn't necessarily mean it's working correctly. Something you don't stop to think about, is my equipment actually working how it should be overall?
Very much. And that is actually something we try really hard to quantify in the nuclear industry, because when we do our probabilistic risk assessment and we say that something has to be inside this parameter, this percentage of the time, we're creating a very definite statement on what is working condition for our systems. So we try and remove that ambiguity because, yeah, a lot of people don't think about it. So the nuclear industry kind of forces us to. Yeah.
Just one other thing I was thinking about with the human machine interface and human errors and all that. It's like if you said hit the red button and the person was colorblind, do you blame the red button or do you blame the colorblind person. It's, the color never changed, so it's still, the machine's not at fault what it's said to do, but it's not like the person could have done it.
Are you gonna be there at that point though? Like,
So actually, colorblindness is a disqualifying condition for nuclear operators. For
Yeah,
exactly
unless
that
it's got
reason.
on a physical, I would assume.
That's
Yeah.
like the most obvious condition I can think of, like the easiest one to
Right,
say, but
right.
we all, there's certain things people can't do, and you don't know you can't do it until you find out. Like, some pilots can't fly over the ocean without getting really sick. They don't know that until they fly over the ocean and get really sick.
Yeah.
So, there's times where there's like that gray area, you can't really blame either. Which,
Absolutely. And, with color blindness, for example, being specifically disallowed, obviously we've tried to put some effort into saying what conditions will create those problems. But of course, you can't know, right? If you have a heart condition, that's also disqualifying. If you have a seizure disorder, it's also disqualifying, right? And those are some obvious ones that we can say, yep, if you randomly fall down and have a seizure, you can't be an operator. And like, for obvious reasons.
They'll find a heart murmur physical again, which you might not know you had anyway or something. You might-
Well, so for example, unmanaged diabetes is a disqualifying condition. And then you get into this argument of, well, what's managed? If I can inject, well, but what if you miss an injection? What if
Yeah.
you have an accident and you lose track of time or eating? And so
How
that
does that go? That is interesting.
that kind of depends on the policies the company has.
You just get on, like you get on it after they notice and you find out, or?
Well, no, they'll know before they hire you, and they might find a reason to hire someone else.
Right.
With pumps now, I think it's a lot less of an issue. People can have the insulin pumps. Yeah, Caden.
Is a heart murmur disqualified to work as
They have a certain list of consequences for heart conditions. So if without medication, you might be prone to passing out, it can be disqualifying, I think is the wording. I'd have to look at the regulation again, but I think I remember that being the case. So having a heart murmur that doesn't necessarily, it's not big enough to have an impact, or you can have a pacemaker that takes care of it, you're fine. If it causes you to pass out randomly, you're
A lot of
not
people
fine.
don't find out until their heart rate's elevated too, and they pass out and they're like, I was only jogging.
So you're actually supposed to get that measured and like do the running test per some of the standards for certain nuclear operator positions. I know that Marcus and Sam and Christy kind of had a laughable physical here at the ISU Health Center for the on-campus reactor. There's supposed to be a very involved physical that they do.
Tell you what, that you toes or something. You're hired.
I think they basically just ask you guys if you feel good, right?
That's pretty nice.
Better. Yeah, really. Are you hungry? Want some soda?
Okay, so we have a couple of documents here in Moodle as we talk about human failure and human error. This is a very definition heavy sheet. And this is going to be another very handy one to refer to in our practical assignments and our written assignments. I might even suggest that this would be a good thing to print and put in a binder that you have with you in class. Because this is going to tell us about the types of human failure. We've introduced on Monday that there's human error, which is unintentional, and violations, which are intentional. Violations can be routine, situational, or exceptional, right? This can be something you do regularly. This is something you do when certain situational factors occur, and this can be something that you don't do except the one time that you did, right? Human error can be divided into skill-based error and mistake. Slips and lapses, so slips of action and lapses of memory, which are skill-based error. This can happen pretty much regardless of experience and training. This is kind of the epitome of the definition of the error we can't help happening, right? They occur in very familiar tasks usually, when we're not paying the amount of attention we should. And when you're very familiar with something, you start to view it as routine. It's actually very hard for us to consciously force ourselves to pay attention. That is actually a skill you have to learn. For anyone who's struggling to think of an example, just think of driving a vehicle. At this point in your life, almost all of you have been doing that for years and probably hundreds of thousands to millions of miles driven, just depending. I doubt very much that any of you think about driving with as much consideration as you did when you were 15 and it was new and you had just gone through training and it was a special privilege to be getting to drive now, and you were in that. Well, here I guess you can get your permit a lot earlier. In Missouri, 15 was your permit. You had to have someone watching you drive, and if you completed enough hours doing that, you could get your license, right? You paid really close attention, and you might have had some ignorance. You might have made violations because you didn't know, or you might have made some of these other errors, these rule-based mistakes or knowledge-based mistakes because you were inexperienced, but you probably made less skill-based errors because you paid so much more attention. As it became routine, now you'll be looking at something else or daydreaming and hit the rumble strip, right? I mean, hopefully none of you do, but you can. Slips are whoops events, not doing what you're meant to do. So you've done a procedure enough that you have it memorized, and instead of reading the procedure, you perform the steps and you perform one too early, right? Or again, performing it out of memory and you omit a step. Carrying out an action with too much or too little strength. You're so used to doing this, you don't pay attention. You just hurry up and get it done, right? Doing the right thing, but on the wrong object, right? So you are not paying attention. You've got two valves here. You swing one and you're like, oh, that was B, not A, because you're so used to opening it, right? Lapses, forgetting to do something or losing your place midway through a task, right? So forgetting to put a nail in something when you're constructing, right? Taking off your mask to talk to a colleague and then forgetting to put it back on. Man, is that pretty relevant now where we all have to wear masks all the time, right? I am pretty used to wearing PPE just from working at the INL for 10 years and being a rad worker before that as well. Even I sometimes find myself adjusting my mask after I've gone in the store and touched something, and like that defeats the purpose of the PPE, right? You got to have those good practices. Work on touching here to adjust instead of touching here. And sometimes I'll just like, sometimes now I've been wearing the mask so much I forget it's even on and just like go to touch my face. So lapses are anything where you kind of forget or are distracted and lose your place. Slips and lapses most typically occur when the task is very familiar and requires little thought. So if you ever find yourself as an operator approaching something with the thought that this is routine, develop the skill now to stop yourself and make yourself treat it as something that has high risk potential, which in the nuclear industry, most of our actions do, and give it respect, even if you are extremely familiar with it. Even if the truth is that you could do it with little thought, discipline yourself to be the person who still thinks through those seemingly insignificant things. Yeah, Kyle.
When you were, well, anywhere, as far as when you were working like in the field environment, I guess, did you ever find yourself in a position where like it was timely and you weren't ready for it to be done yet, and you're still working on something important and they're rushing you?
Yes.
And then like, I guess, I just wonder how INL handles that. Do they stop and be like, okay, this is more important than our timeline? And how often that doesn't happen or happens, you know what I mean?
Right. So most of the time,
Like
all of
shutdowns, I guess
INL.
I'm thinking more
Yeah.
coming back online.
Yeah, no, most of the time, all of INL is very good about not putting production over safety, which is time pressure is kind of the epitome of that, like get this done versus get this done safely. I am sure that I have a little bit of bias because if they were going to push time pressure, they're most definitely going to stop that when DOE comes and observes, right? When their regulator is watching the task. So by my interaction with the system, I know that I changed the system, right? However, sometimes when I'd show up partway through a job on purpose to see what they were doing before I got there, I very rarely found time pressure. There was a specific incident that occurred at MFC when I was doing oversight where the operator in the critique, the post-job review, said very specifically that he had felt time pressure. And it was kind of a big dramatic moment because as that person was trying to say that sentence in the critique, where we very much operate on the idea that we're not trying to find blame. A critique is just to get all the facts out there. No one's blamed, no one's in trouble. Speak honestly, right? The manager stood up, was super pissed, and very aggressively was like, we said at the pre-job brief there was no time pressure. There's no reason for you to feel time pressure. Well, what they were doing is they were trying to restart INRAD. And if you do not restart INRAD within a certain amount of time, the reactor is going to become xenon precluded. And we're going to learn about this in our reactor theory class, but essentially, one of the major fission products you produce is xenon. Xenon is a very large neutron absorber. And after you shut the reactor down, your production of xenon increases. And so you produce a lot of negative reactivity, which means that you may not be able to start up until that decays away. If you can start up before it peaks, you're fine. If you can't, you have to wait 24 to 72 hours for it to decay away. So even if the manager told that operator you don't have time pressure, that operator was aware the reality is you have time pressure or I'm going to be shut down for 2 days and we're not going to get any of our tasks done and that's going to be a problem, right? So the manager might say, operate safely and don't rush, but that operator knew the reality of the physics and condition of that reactor is I have to operate quickly or I am going to be in trouble for losing 2 days of operation. And so there you have your management trying to do the right safety culture thing because that operator was not a dummy. He knew what his system was going to do. Like he knew he had to get something done. And then he made a mistake and he caused it to scram and then they were shut down for 4 days anyway. But
right, that's more what I'm talking about is like when that happens and then a situation occurs, a negative situation like that, and they're down for 4 days. Do they usually go after that operator or the,
no,
you know what I mean?
No, that operator did not get any disciplinary action. He still works there. He's been promoted now. Well, when I left, he had been. They changed some of their procedure and policy because the mistake he made, he had a suggestion for how he could have not made that. And actually the mistake he made is one I made, I don't know, probably a dozen times starting up the reactor at the university that I had my license at. It's very easy to do, especially on small reactors like the research one I had in INRAD, which is a small reactor. So it's not something that other operators at INRAD hadn't done. But, you know, he said, even though management wasn't putting time pressure on me, the reality is there was a time pressure to get this done. And so one of the changes management then made was they build an extra 3 days into a lot of their deadlines now. So if you have a shutdown, that operator does not feel there has to be a time pressure. It's okay to just wait for the xenon to decay, right? At the power reactor I was at, a lot more time pressure, a lot more struggle to balance that, a lot more pushback from operators was
I
necessary.
just feel like the time situation, I mean, not necessarily INL, but more times than not, like my job before the Army and then the Army, you know, things happen because of time.
Yeah. It definitely does happen. The nuclear industry tries really hard to avoid it.
Yeah.
All right, so I know we're out of time. Those were great questions. No, don't be sorry. This is really straightforward and easy for you guys to read. So I'll let you read those remaining 2 pages. And if you have any questions, let me know. And we'll get a chance to apply it when we do our exercise on Friday.
When did you say I would need that book back? Can I wait until February 1st to order?
So order it, probably not. If you order it and it doesn't arrive until February 1st, you're probably okay. Let me answer that one second. Does anybody online have any questions before I end the Zoom?
Nope,
I have
I'm
a
good.
quick one. Are we gonna, do you think we're gonna need to use this, sorry, I'm renting the book that you were just reading out of, and do you think we're gonna use it for like the full semester?
I have a couple of reading assignments from it throughout the semester.
Okay, that's cool. I'll just rent it for the whole semester. I was just making sure it wasn't for like the first month or something like that, you know?
I'm trying to look. I don't think there's any readings in it once we start our case study, which starts February 15th.
Okay, maybe I'll just rent it through February then. Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
Yeah.